Good evening, everybody, and welcome to webinar 52. Today we are talking about the A to Z of social work theory. So welcome. Make sure your chat is set to all panelists and attendees, so everybody can see and reply to your messages. And what we're talking about today is the usual: where in the world are you? Are you a social worker? Are you a student? What area of practice are you in? But also, as tonight is our 52nd webinar, can you believe it? We want you to tell us in the chat, what's your favourite webinar? So if you've seen them all, you'll have quite a lot to choose from. So we had a bit of a chat earlier in our WhatsApp group, all saying what our favourite webinar is. So we're curious to know, what is your favourite webinar? So I'm going to pass over to Siobhan, and I'm going to spend the rest of the evening reading your comments.
Thank you very much, Kelly. So welcome to webinar number 52. There's 52 weeks in a year. There's 52 packs in a pack of playing cards. So we did think about what shall we do, but we thought 52 was a good number for us to think about taking a break from. So we will be back, as Kelly said. I think it's the 15th of September that we're coming back, but we decided to conclude our session tonight with a back to basics webinar, because we know that people really like the back to basics webinar. When we ended season 1 on webinar number 26, we did an A to Z of reflective practice. So we thought, well, look, you know, these webinars are all about reflective practice and theory. So why not do an A to Z of theory for our webinar number 52? So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to do the A to Z of theory and practice. Now, if you attended webinar 26, you'll already have an idea of what it's about and how we're going to do the A to Z. But if not, then this might be a new experience for you. The idea is that it's about the building blocks that we have. So theory provides the building blocks for practice. It's all about good practice in social work, but social work provides the building blocks for theory as well. So the two of them are kind of connected together. Theory and practice come together, and we build on, practice builds on theory and theory builds on practice. That's the relationship between the two. So what we're going to be doing is looking at building blocks that begin with letters, and then we're going to spell something out at the end of the webinar. So as I go through each letter, I'm going to say to you, A is for. In the chat, tell me what you think the letter A might be for. So if you're thinking about social work theory, and I say, okay, the letter A stands for something in relation to theory-informed practice, what do you think it might stand for? Put it in the chat. We'll see what kind of ideas we get. Each team member has got a letter tonight. So altogether, there are 10 of us. I'm going to be doing all the other letters. The 9 team members are going to take a letter each. We started off by thinking, well, should you have the letter that starts your name? So Cat, for example, has got the letter C, but that doesn't work because Chris's name also begins with the letter C. So we've not been able to do that, but everyone just has a letter, and they've either chosen something that they think relates to theory-informed practice that begins with that letter, or perhaps their favourite theory that begins with that letter. So we're setting off on the journey. You've got the idea. I don't know what you've been putting in the chat, but what you think the letter A is for, and maybe some of the team members will give me a thumbs up if it's the right word, or the word I've gone for is in the chat. What we're going to do, the letter A, we're going to start off with is, it's all about attitude. It's your attitude towards theory-informed practice. So what you can see on here now, and I've made sure it's completely anonymous, so you wouldn't be able to track it down, but this is something that I saw not that long ago on a social media site where somebody asked this question. They said this: I'm just wondering if any other student social workers struggled in their first year. I'm on my first year of the BSc social work course in the UK, and I'm struggling to remember theories as they just don't interest me, if I'm honest. Before anyone comes for my throat, my whole first year has been online via our uni software, which has added to this because it's hard for me to focus and stay motivated when I could just go and get in bed if I wanted to. Lol. I understand only I can make this change, but I just don't know if it's me or if it's a universal problem. lots of people don't have a positive attitude to social work theory. I think that kind of illustrates it, because lots of people were replying and saying, oh, I'm with you, I get it, you know, that's where I am as well. And I do think that everything going online has actually made theory perhaps more difficult to get hold of. It's not much fun. Sometimes I think people find it a bit difficult to get through and to think about how it applies to practice. Now, I didn't take, I answered that. I posted something where I found that. I posted some advice and I said, I really feel for you. I think it's really difficult. Here's my advice. I posted some advice, because for me, that particular post didn't show necessarily a negative attitude, but the response to my suggestions that said, oh, I might do if I've got a minute, that showed actually I've not got an attitude where I want to find out about social work theory, because whatever help was being offered, the person didn't seem to be interested in. And what I'd say to you is that actually one of the biggest blocks, if we're thinking about building blocks, one of the biggest blocks to learning is your attitude. To say, I'm just not interested in theories, theories are just about people. All theory does is it gives you a way of understanding people. You've got to be interested in people if you want to be a social worker. So, you know, let's show that we have some interest in social work theory. Now, I'm assuming everyone that's turned up for the webinar has an interest in social work theory. So A, you've got the right kind of attitude. That's our starting point. Okay, what do you think the letter B might be for? You've started to get the idea now. So we've had the letter A. What might the letter B stand for? Now, I've gone for the two closely connect, because we're trying to build everything together here. The attitude connects to the letter B. The B that I've gone for is barriers. You need to think about, there are lots of different barriers in place that can get in the way of us using theory in our practice, of theory-informed practice. And what you need to do is understand the barriers that you have. Now, some of the other letters that we have tonight, you might find, actually, that's my main barrier. That's the big thing that's holding me back in terms of theory-informed practice. But everybody's barrier is going to be different. So for some people, as the previous slide showed, then maybe it's online learning that's creating a barrier. But the barrier could be different things for different people. So I want you to think about, what is it that's getting in your way? What can you do to overcome the barriers that are there? And what help might you need in order to do that? And then reach out for that help, ask for that help. That help is there, but start from the position of understanding the barriers that you have in terms of your use of theory in practice. So we've had the A, we've had the B. We're going to go for the letter C. And I did tell you that Kat got the letter C. So it was Kat's choice. So go on, Kat, you put your mic on and you tell us what you went for with the letter C. I don't know what, you can see the chat, so you'll be able to see what's going on in the chat and if people have already got the letter C in place.
I can. There's lots of C's going in there, but not one that is the one I've picked. So I've picked cards for mine, these theory cards. And I used these long time before I joined the webinar team. They were my go-to and still are. I use these in my practice currently. I don't know if you've got these, but if you haven't, they are a must. I use them throughout my essays, within supervision. It's a great reflective tool to look through them and have kind of case studies. I'd get big flip chart paper in supervision sessions with my practice educator. We would discuss the cases and we would look at different theories that can fit in for the children and families that I was working with. You get a guide in the book in with the cards, and there's lots of different activities as well, which is really helpful. These are absolutely amazing. These are all the cards that are here. They break down all of the theories into bite-sized chunks, make them really manageable to understand. I remember in my final essay for my final year, I had 6 A4 pages of references, and there was a lot of these in there. So that's C.
Thank you, Kat. That sounded like a television advert or something, the way you did that. No, that's what you were going to do. But I
Sorry.
can tell you no, it's fine. I can tell you've had the cards for a long time because you've actually got the blue box, haven't you?
I have got the blue box. This is the
it.
second edition. The notebook that comes with it is all kind of worn, and these are all thumbed through. They've been gone through so many times when I've been trying to look, they've even got pen mark all over them, from trying to find the right ones and the right approaches that I can kind of have a better understanding of the people that I'm working with. And it's definitely not a television ad. These have been my saviour and still are, actually. I take them into team meetings quite often, and when we're having discussions all together, it's quite a good idea to drill down and have a look at those, make sure that we're still using theory in practice. We don't have to stop just because we're in practice and we're not students anymore.
Absolutely, and that's really important, Kat, that it doesn't fall off the agenda once you qualify. In terms of the cards, though, each edition has a different colour. So the edition 1 was a yellow box, edition 2 blue, edition 3 is red, but you can get the cards just to update your box to the following edition, which I know you've got, Kat, you've got the extension pack. And the reason that I do that is I see the cards as a kind of investment for your whole career, so that it does mean that you're keeping theory on your agenda once you qualify and you take it all the way through. So thank you, Kat, for your letter C and going for the cards. So you can see that we're kind of charging through the letters now. We're going to go on to the letter D. What do you think in the chat the letter D could be for? What you've got to be aware of, and you're going to be able to see now from what's going on in the chat, is for each letter, there were so many different things that we could have gone for. So obviously Kat chose C and cards, but there could have been, 10, 15, 20 different things that she could have said in terms of the letter C. So what do you think the letter D is going to be all about? Now, the letter D is something that we've talked a lot about in the webinars, maybe not using this phrase, but actually we've talked about these things a lot in the webinars. And the D that I went for was decolonising the curriculum. It's really important that we think about where the theories that are taught on social work training and where the theories we use come from. We're all very aware of and very committed to that reigniting anti-racism in social work practice. If you want to take a critical view of theory, if you want to be critically reflective, you know how much we talk about critical reflection in the webinars, and criticality is all about thinking about power dynamics. Why are all of the theories that we use written by white, middle-class academic men? Why is that where the theory base comes from? It needs to come from a much more diverse group. We need to recognize that theory should come from a whole range of different people. We need to decolonize the curriculum in terms of the theory that we use. So I'm going to ask you to just think about the questioning who wrote this theory when you're thinking about using theory, and really trying to make sure that you're drawing on diversity in the theories that you're using. Okay, so what about the letter E? What do you think we're going to go for with the letter E? Now, this one, I'm really hoping that we've talked about this in previous webinars. We focused quite a lot on this in webinar number 17. It seems like it didn't feel like it was that long ago, but it was webinar number 17 when I looked back at it that we really focused on the letter E is all about the envelope. Using the envelope activity to help you to think about how does theory relate to practice. Now, we don't have time tonight for me to explain what the envelope activity is and how to use it, but you all know that the envelope activity is available on the smartphone app. You all know that the envelope activity is available on socialworkconnect.com, which you can, if you're a student, you can claim use for. I'm still allowing students to use that for free at the moment as the pandemic continues. But the envelope activity is about how we can think about the application of theory in terms of who the person is that we're working with, why we're working with them, what work we're doing and where we work. And in webinar number 17, we used this, we broke it down, we gave an example. If you remember, we looked at Bart Simpson and how theory might relate to working with the Simpsons. But the envelope activity for me is one of the most important activities that I would use as a practice educator with students. I designed it to help students to think about how theory relates to practice, rather than simply, when you ask a student what theory have you used, them coming out with the same 3 every time, just the 3 that they know, and they make that fit the situation. And that question takes us into the letter F. What do you think the letter F might stand for? In terms of theory-informed practice, where might we be going with this? We've done the envelope, we're going through to the letter F. And the letter F, for me, what I chose was the fear factor, because students are very often really holding on to this fear factor around theory and practice. And actually, our very first webinar was all about the social work theory fear factor. Made me laugh a little bit when Kelly was saying we were all really nervous. I remember it as though it was yesterday, and we actually were incredibly nervous. It was a really scary thing to do. But we looked at that in that webinar, at what happens when I, as a practice educator, ask a student the question, what theory have you used there? And what ends up looking back at me is like a terrified rabbit caught in the headlights. Students can often be so frightened about being asked that question. And what we try and do in these webinars is help to address the theory fear factor. So at the end of the A to Z tonight, we're going to look at how we've come full circle from that first webinar, looking at the theory fear factor. Okay, so we're going to go over to another team member now. We're going to go over to the letter G, and the letter G is Di's letter. So Di, if you want to put your mic on and tell us what you went for in terms of the G. Again, you'll be able to see in the chat what people have gone for in terms of the G, and whether or not the G that you chose is actually in the chat. But I'll put my mic off and you can go for your letter G.
Yeah, nothing in the chat at the moment. So I went for the letter G, which I went for growth. So G is for growth. And I initially thought about human growth and development. And quite similar to Kat, I used the theory card. So I had Erickson's 8 stages, 8 ages. I had Levinson's seasons of human development, attachment theory, and that was actually something that somebody had said under the letter A. And then sort of Piaget and his theories of development. So some of these relate to children and some of them relate to adults and children. So they were mine for sort of theories that we could use on growth. But I think I also thought about the growth of this community. I think the growth of our connections in this team, how we've all developed, how everybody that's come along every night, as you know, every week has really sort of developed in their knowledge and their skills, etc. So for me, sort of the growth wasn't just so much about theories, but it was about our sort of confidence building, building our skills, building our knowledge, etc., and just sort of coming together and making those really strong connections over sort of the past 12 months. So that was my growth.
I love that. Thanks, Di. I tell you what's really good about that, Di, is thinking about, you've used the letter G to think about theories of growth, but then growth in theory. So you've kind of connected it and done that connection, which is what we all need to do. So thank you very much for that, and sharing of your letter G. We're going to go on through to the letter H. So let's have a little think about what we might have in relation to the letter H. What might we have in relation to theories around the letter H? And again, at some points, I think people are perhaps thinking, hang on, I thought A was for attachment. I thought, you know, and maybe you're thinking about particular, B for Bowlby, you know, you're thinking about particular writers. We will get to the point where there are letters for particular theories that people have chosen. But along the way, we've been really looking, I suppose, like Di's just mentioned a few theories, but gone more for a general word, a generic growth. The H, I've not gone for a specific theory, but I've gone for a particular activity that, again, I think is a really useful activity in terms of thinking about the difference between a theory, a model, a method, and an approach, which has been, for me, one of the fundamental foundations of what we're trying to do in these webinars, is help people to really understand that, because it addresses the fear factor. And because I thought that this was a really good webinar, we did this. It's not actually that long ago, is it? When we did building a body of theory, and Dave shared his body of theory, and Kulchuma shared how she's using theory in a school, and Becky shared her use of theory and working in a placement in the prison environment. And I think it was a really useful way of helping people to think about, what might you be able to do to take into your placement into supervision with a practice educator, or to write a reflection about using your head, heart, hands, and a method, a tool in your hands. So I went for the H was the head, the heart, and the hands. I mean, H is for all of them. So I had to go for that, really, didn't I? There were no other options. Okay, after H comes the letter I. And I was Ngozi's choice of letter. So Ngozi, if you want to put your mic on and tell us, I think this is going to be the first one where it's a particular theory that we've got with a letter. So I'll give you the mic and you can give us your letter I.
Oh, I can see from the charts, I only see ideas, idea, and identity. Well, for me, it is intersectionality. Intersectionality is a useful tool for critical reflection, which is a part of the critical social work tradition and aims to challenge oppression and inequality. It's also a useful way of understanding individuals' multiple identities, where there are multiple interlocking and systemic inequalities at the level of social structures. An intersectional approach focuses the interplay and complexity between gender, sexuality, race, class, and cultural differences. It also helps to get the capacity to keep central power relations in urgent focus. So in essence, for me, intersectionality, it helps me to understand, it gives me a better way of thinking about oppression, which is like what oppression in the workplace. And we know that this thing is there, but this theory of intersectionality helps me to understand that. And yeah, I bring that critical reflection aspect there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ngozi. I mean, I think intersectionality is such an important concept for us all to be aware of and think about. So I'm really glad that you chose the I to be all around intersectionality. And I think it's something that practice educators, if we've been qualified for quite a long time, intersectionality is fairly new in terms of the theory base that's being brought into social work. It's not something that, well, so, I mean, you know, I qualified 31 years ago. It's certainly not something that was part of my training, but it's not something that's part of ongoing in-house training. So I think a lot of practice educators are not necessarily going to be conscious and aware of intersectionality. So I think this is one that students can bring into supervision to enable teams and practice educators to learn from. And one of the great things that, I know there'll be practice educators in the audience today, but one of the great things of being a practice educator is that students bring new ideas to you. You know, they bring the latest theories to you. And I think thinking about critical theory, you know, for example, critical race theory, and then intersectionality coming out of that sort of critical theoretical area, I think is really important. So thank you for that, Ngozi, sharing with us your letter I. Although I could see you said in the chat ideas, which is fabulous, because theory is just someone's ideas, really. That is what theory is, isn't it? So people are obviously getting words that we think are really useful to use. Okay, so let's go for the letter J. What do you think the letter J might stand for in relation to theory-informed practice? This word actually, or it's a phrase that I'm going to use more really, for the letter J has been mentioned lots of times tonight. Di has talked about connections, and Gozi in Intersectionality has just talked about how things intersect and connect together. So for me, the letter J is all about joining the dots, bringing things together. I hear loads of phrases like things like theory and practice, theory to practice, theory for practice, putting theory in practice, linking theory with practice, using theory in practice. There's a whole range of different phrases that are used. I'm often asked to deliver training, very often for practice educators in local authorities or apprentices, and the local authority will give me a title that will be one of those. And literally I've had every one of those and a few others, so many different phrases used. But for me, it's really all about the connectivity between theory and practice. And it's about using theory and practice, drawing new ideas and practice wisdom out of your practice. So I would use the phrase more, it's all about theorizing. It's about bringing new ideas out of your practice, using new ideas in your practice, and creating that connection between the theory base and the practice that we do. So that's what I went for in terms of the letter J. We're going to come over now to K, and again I'm going to hand over to another team member, and this time it does work in terms of the letter K because we're going for Kelly with the letter K. So Kelly, do you want to put your mic on and tell us your letter K?
Yeah, thank you, Siobhan. Yes, I'm just looking in the chat. Nobody's got it yet. So this is it's a theory with an actual name, with a person's name in the theory. So I'm just looking at the moment. There's lots and lots of guesses, but not the right one. Oh, Helen's got it. Cartman, brilliant. And then Rihanna right afterwards. So yeah, my K is Cartman's drama triangle. So I'm on placement at the moment, and I delivered a presentation to a recovery group. So my placement is a drug and alcohol service, and I was chatting with the group facilitator, and we're talking about group dynamics and team building and Tuckman's forming, storming, norming, and then that led on to Cartman's drama triangle. So I said, oh, that's a little bit like Cartman's drama triangle. So on the next slide is one slide from a presentation that I put together. So this is for a group that are in recovery from drug and alcohol use, beyond kind of stopping their use or getting it at a level that they're comfortable with, and then I'm looking at recovery in terms of why do people take drugs and alcohol, what's going on in your mind, what's going on in the rest of your life, about relationships. So they're now looking at that. So this is the theory that I presented to them. So the idea is, if you're familiar with Catman's drama triangle, it's part of transactional analysis. So it's kind of like everybody has a role to play, and that could be persecutor, rescuer, or victim. And our personality styles kind of fit more into one than the others, and that's to do with various things, our upbringing, the environment that we're in, that kind of thing. So it was about these people in this recovery group trying to identify where they kind of sat in that triangle, and then to identify that lots of things that happen in our lives are based on drama. And if you're in a drama triangle, you're not getting your needs met, you're just getting drama, basically. So as you can see on the screen there, there's something about the persecutor, there's something about the victim, and then the next one is something about the rescuer. So I'm not going to read it all out to you, but it's really interesting to kind of look at naturally, where do you fit? And if you fit in one of these roles, these are some of the things that you might say or might come into your head that will impact on how you deal with situations. And really interestingly, I'm just going to end by saying that I studied new development before I studied social work. And I remember, I won't say I remember learning this because I didn't learn it. I remember it being taught, and I remember thinking, I don't understand that. That's a load of rubbish. That doesn't make any sense. And I absolutely hated those lessons. But this time round, I've got really into it, and I'm really interested. And I think that sometimes it's the way something is taught and how it's relevant to what you're doing is really important. It's not the actual thing. So if you look at this in terms of yourself, see which one you identify with, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, Thanks for that, Kelly. I tell you what I think is really interesting about this. When you sent the slide over to me, I thought it's a great slide. I love the way you put it together. But also, what I'd say is, for me, I love Cartman's drama triangle. I use it a lot, but I actually always have it with the triangle the other way about. So I have it with the victim at the top and then the persecutor and rescuer roles at the bottom. And the way I look at it is, and I try and remember that how the letters go together, I think about how when people feel vulnerable for whatever reason, they can place themselves into a victim role. And then what happens is they see anybody who holds power as being a persecutor of them. You know, that person is persecuting me because they've got power. And then they seek out a rescuer and give the rescuer all of the responsibility to rescue them. So I see it as like the vulnerability, the power, and the responsibility as well, linking into these. And I think it's just such a fabulous theory, you know, in terms of, I mean, as a practice educator, I use it to think about when students are struggling and where they might place themselves. I use it a lot in terms of thinking about newly qualified workers and how they can get sucked into a rescuer role, doing everything for people rather than enabling people to do things for themselves. And I just think it's such a fabulous theory. So thank you for sharing that.
It is, and I think what I've learned this time round is that people can move in one situation, one fallout, say, one disagreement. People can shift in one conversation around the triangle. I found that absolutely fascinating. You're not stuck. You need to get out of it, but you can move around the triangle without knowing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So thank you for sharing that, the letter K in our alphabet. We've actually got a run of team members coming together, which I don't think I'd realised earlier, but we've also got the next couple of letters are coming from team members. So we're going to go on from the letter K into L. And for L, we've got Nicola. So Nicola, if you want to put your microphone on, I know you can see the chat, so I don't know if people are coming up with the right kind of L, but in a way it links into what Kelly's just said about how theory is taught as well, doesn't it? Your letter L. So do you want to go ahead with your
can you guys hear me? So yes, I can see label, listen, learn, legitimate. But my letter L was for language. So for me, I just felt that language is sort of embedded into with theory, but it's coated, like I said, in jargon and acronyms, and it seems so far removed from what we're actually asked to do. And so sometimes you spend a lot of time decoding what is in theory, and then how it affects your application basically into practice. So I think it's the same experience in practice and as a student, you know, whether it is writing essays or whether it is in the work where you want to put something together with families, but you're not sure if that intervention is right based on the theory, but it may just be something that you practically think of, but you can apply it to a theory. So I think language is really important, and jargon and sort of acronyms and that could be the biggest hurdle. And then putting it all together, because I'm a big picture person, and then breaking it down to baby steps, I found that was sort of a bit of a challenge for me. So I think I know, and I would say to students, you concentrate on understanding what the language is. It's okay to break it down to basics. And one of the advice I got from one of my lecturers was get an A-level book, get a GCSE book if you can't understand the language of something, so that it will help you interpret what it means in sort of the articles and the journals and stuff like that.
I agree with you, Nicola. I think sometimes the language that people put around theory, and there are some particular theorists where I feel like I have to read each page in a book like 10 times to try and work out what is it that they're saying here. And then you get through it and you think, well, why didn't they just say that in the first place? I don't understand why that language is around it.
Yeah, and if you're neurodiverse, then you've got two hurdles. So it's like climbing Twin Peaks at that point, because you're trying to figure out what did you say, and then what do I remember of what you said, and what does it mean, and how do I apply that, and then do I remember if I'm applying it correctly? And so it can go like that. So I think, you know, language in the A to Z is really important.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Nicola. Thank you. And then we're going to go to the letter M. And for M, we've got Chris. So Chris, again, you can see in the chat, I don't know if people are coming up with the letter M. I think, you know, you've gone for a specific theory again, haven't you? Beginning with the letter M. So
I have. And there aren't any M's in the chat so far. Oh, Maslow we've got, and management. So models, yeah, but I haven't gone for any of that. So for me, I've actually gone for motivational interviewing. And for me, actually, that's just based on having that positive relationship with somebody and being able to use that to not only show empathy for the individual situation, but actually also really hear what they're saying about the situation, and then to use that to see how change might be achieved. Now, in my role, which is actually mainly with people who are very much older and often have got advanced dementia, that can be quite a challenge, but often it's about using that with the family members as well, because they can get stuck in a bit of a rut in terms of, you know, thinking there's only one way to support that person, and often they're in a bit of a crisis about that. So it relies on actually being in a place of an honest and open relationship, because they need to trust you to be able to consider thinking about things differently and responding to change, you know. So we sort of think about motivational interviewing, if I could say it, in terms of change talk, and then actually maybe people who are stuck in a sustained talk kind of pattern. So often it takes, as people have said, baby steps to kind of get to that point where people are willing to listen and think about it differently. And it takes time to develop skill in listening and understanding and picking up on the cues that they're giving you, where you can identify each kind of talk and how people might be, you know, willing to think about change. And actually, you know, I even think about this in terms of myself and my own development. I use it as a bit of a reflective tool. Think about what my own barriers are to my change and how I can see things differently, because we can all be guilty of it, can't we? You know, change isn't easy for anybody, and understanding that and seeing where you're at is half the battle, I think. So that's me, motivational interviewing.
thank you. Thanks for that, Chris. I tell you what I think is really helpful there is a lot of the time people think about motivational interviewing really only being used in work with children, because it's talked about a lot in terms of children and families work. So I think what's really interesting is how you've shown how you can really use it as an adult social worker. So yeah, I really like the way you think about, you know, moving people on from just being stuck where they are in that sustained talk conversation into talking about change. I think is really helpful. So thank you for that. Thanks, Chris, for that.
That's all right.
Okay, so we're going to go on to the letter N. Now it's back to me. So it may not be a specific theory, it might be more of an activity or more of a thought around theory. But what do you think? Let's see. I can't see what's in the chat, but you know, let's have an idea of what's in the chat, because I'm just thinking in the follow-up email, it'd be really interesting if Diane Kulchuma, who do the emails, could actually send out the A to Z that's been developed through the chat, because that'd actually be really interesting for us all to gather together. So what do you see as the letter N might be about? Now, Kat talked earlier about using the cards, and I'm really pleased she held up the booklet, because I think sometimes people get the cards and just think, oh, I use these as though it was a book, you know, I just use them to read. But actually the idea of the cards is that they're there for you to do activities with and do CPD activities with. You know, the whole point of them being cards is that you can do different things with them. And this is an activity that I'm going to tell you about, my letter N, that's in the booklet. And it's actually my favourite activity to do with theory. You know, when Nicola's talked about the language of theory, and I've talked about the fear that people can have of theory, actually, I think the best activity that I do in training that I do with people and things is name that tune. I absolutely love this activity. I use it a lot in training, but if you're a student, you could use this. It's a great activity, actually. You know, Kelly's talked about, she did a presentation as part of her placement, and quite often you might be asked to do that, or you might be asked to lead something in a team meeting, for example. And both the N and the O are both really good activities for students to take to a team meeting as a CPD activity. And Name That Tune is essentially where you say, I mean, the way I do it is I give out the cards, and people might have 5 or 6 cards, and I say, okay, link those theories that you've got on the cards to a song. The tragedy model is in there. People always find the song. They even do the actions of the dance for the song that links into the tragedy model, because they go for tragedy. But it gives you the idea around this. So here's just some suggestions. These are the things, I call them the social work standards, because these are the songs that come up every time I do this activity. But Dolly Parton's 9 to 5 comes up for so many different things, not just managerialism, but there's an example. Erickson's 8 Ages, which Di mentioned earlier. A lot of people like that song, Once I Was 7 Years Old. Crisis intervention theory, people always come up with, Help by the Beatles. The biographical approach, a One Direction song, The Story of My Life. The medical model, Just Like a Pill. The trans-theoretical model of change, people go for changes now. You can have the David Bowie version, or you can have the, oh, help me out here because I've lost the name now. You're going to have to help me out, guys. There's the Kelly Osbourne version, the Osbourne's version. So there's lots of different versions, aren't there, of changes as a song. But that gives you the idea. There's so many different things that you can do with that Name That Tune activity. Take a look, if you've got a set of cards and you're a student, take a look in the booklet for ideas around how to facilitate a Name That Tune session. It's a great way of keeping theory on the professional agenda and doing a CPD activity. Honestly, you cannot be frightened of theory when you start laughing about the songs and get a bit of karaoke going and all kinds of stuff. I do remember doing this once though, and it was quite a long way from home, and I drove home, and that night I got an email from somebody saying they literally gave me an Elvis song for every single theory that was in the theory card set, and I thought this person's really clearly a big fan there. But it can ruin you listening to music for a few days, because every song that comes on you start thinking, what theory can I link that to? So just be warned, you know, if you're going to listen to music, don't have just done the Name That Tune activity. Okay, that's one activity that practice educators can use with students, or students can use to facilitate team meetings. The other one is one that I'm using more and more now. I never used to use it in my training back in the day when I was doing face-to-face training, but since everything's gone online, I'm finding Name That Tune I don't use as much, because I used to use that on face-to-face training, and I'd get people doing it in groups, and it always got a feel almost like a bit of a pub quiz feel was going around the Name That Tune activity. I find that more difficult now I'm doing things online. So I use instead a different activity, which is inspired by Mark Dole's work. You know, we had a webinar led by Mark Dole, Social Work in 42 Objects and More, and it's also inspired by third object theory. So the O stands for objects. So I ask people, I ask students that I'm working with, for example, to bring an object to supervision that represents a social work theory, and to tell me about the object and why it represents that social work theory. I use it in training. So I say to people, okay, let's take 5 minutes away from the screen, go and find an object and bring it back to the screen and show it me and tell me what theory it represents and why it represents it. So I have done that activity before the session, and I'm going to show you my objects now. Hopefully they won't make too much noise as I lift them up. It won't be too unpleasant on the microphone, but this is my object. I don't know if everyone can see the objects. It's actually, there's 3 objects there. So here is my object on screen. In the chat, tell me what you think this object or these objects might represent in terms of social work theory. So it's 3 spoons, different sizes, 3 different spoons. What theory do you think I have in my mind when I chose those objects to bring to the session tonight? Are there any ideas in the chat? So Kelly, I can see your face at the minute. So Kelly, can you tell me, has anybody got any ideas in the chat about theories that spoons might relate to?
Yeah, people are saying, is it theory, model, practice? Is it PCS, ecological theory, freeway shuffle, communication theory? Someone is saying autistic people might use this term. I think that it's almost there. Something about perspective. Not quite. Nobody's got it. No.
Right, okay, but it's interesting because actually the spoons could relate to all of those things, and that's the key thing, and in a way shows what theory is about. When you're looking at a situation, the theory that you use might be completely different to the theory that somebody else would use to look at the same situation. And that's why your practice educator asks that question in supervision. It's because I have to ask students, what theory are you thinking about? Because I'm not a mind reader. They need to tell me how they see it. And actually, those spoons could relate to any of those three. I was thinking the three-way shuffle is actually a really good suggestion, you know, so they're really good suggestions, but actually the theory that it relates to is spoon theory. And I'm going to tell you a bit about spoon theory, or you can see it on the screen. I'm going to suggest you go away and maybe look up spoon theory. So it's a theory that was developed. It comes from the disability community, essentially. It's a theory around chronic pain and long-term illness, really, developed by Christine Miserandino as a way of explaining energy levels in terms of chronic disability and chronic pain. Sometimes now you might hear people in terms of the disability rights movement describing themselves as spoonies, and it's something I think that social workers should be conscious of and aware about, because it's a way that we could discuss conditions with people. So if you were working with somebody, for example, who had fibromyalgia, or if you were working with somebody who had a chronic long-term condition, EDS, or I think it's going to be particularly helpful and relevant to think about in terms of long COVID. So the idea behind spoon theory is it's simply a way of describing energy levels. So you would think about, you know, I've only got 12 spoons in a day, and to do particular activities costs a particular number of spoons, and so I'm going to save my spoons. So you might hear people with a long-term medical condition saying, I'm saving my spoons. And what that means is saving energy. It's a really useful theory. But again, what I'm trying to do is show you here about how we should be decolonizing the curriculum, because this comes from a person experiencing a long-term health condition who's developed a theory about long-term health conditions. It's not written by an academic. It's not full of language that's difficult to penetrate. This is a theory that I think is really relevant, and I'd ask you to go and maybe take a look at it after the session today. So that gives you an idea. Sometimes the object can be incredibly literal, as I just used spoons to talk about spoon theory, but sometimes you could use spoons to talk about the three-way shuffle, or to talk about the other things that you were referring to there, Kelly. So let's think about the letter P. Didn't feel like that P should come straight after. I was thinking, oh, that's coming after S, but of course it's coming after O. It wasn't spoon theory, it was objects that took us into spoon theory. That threw me completely then. So we're going to go to the letter P, and it's Dave, our team member, who is going to tell us about his choice for the letter P. So Dave, you'll be able to see what's going on in the chat and whether people choose the what you went for in terms of your letter P.
Yeah, only one, my boy Warren so far. But oh, two, there we go. Although I do like what everyone's coming up with, people coming up with power, professionalism, practice. So they're all brilliant. But yes, guys, I've gone with personalization. And look, I use the cards. Buy the cards, they're amazing. But so personalization, I've tried to think of ways of showing how it's different from person-centered approach. And person-centered approaches, which I'm sure we've all heard of because I never shut up about it, is the theory that came from Carl Rogers, and it's all about taking the person and putting them in the center of the image. But it can be done if you just know about the person. Personalization has to directly involve the person and has to take their wishes into account at every level. And the idea is, I know in Britain at least there's stuff like SDS, the person, oh guys, I've forgotten what SDS actually stands for. Self-directed support. Thank you. I've seen you all typing. And like There's this that's kind of a relatively new approach as far as I'm aware, and it's like, so if we were working with a person, they would be involved from the very start. It would be all about their wishes, and obviously as social workers we need to do our best to give them the best in life, but at the end of the day they know best for themselves. So that's what personalization is. I'll read off what the card says because it's a good, the overall aim is to identify what is most important to each person for them to achieve a good life and ensure that the support they receive is designed and coordinated around their desired outcomes, which is why it's personalized, because it comes down to everybody's individual. So you could have two people who live in the same house, both have autism, both love living together, but one wants to play basketball every day of the week and the other one wants to sit and watch TV, and you can't force them both to go and play basketball because it's easier for you as the person that runs the place or the social worker that supports. So you have to work alongside them to make sure it happens. I wasn't going to do personalization, but I was recently listening to a podcast on Spotify, and they were talking about a really famous case a few years ago, the two people that had heavy learning disabilities, but they'd been living together, they got married, and they were living happily, and they were living a good, stable life, but then they decided they wanted to have children. And suddenly the local authority were brought into play, and the people had to be put on psychiatric watch for a year before they were allowed even a say in their decisions. And that really reaffirmed the fact that I think, regardless of what we do, personalization has to be at the heart of everything we do with people, because those people had shown that they could take care of themselves and they were happy and they loved each other and they were married and they were living together. And then suddenly the local authority decided it wasn't okay, even though they knew the people. So that was my reasoning behind personalization. And I think it's similar to individualization, but it's got more of a collaborated approach where you work with the person specifically. So I went on a bit longer than I intended to, sorry, but yeah, I hope that made sense.
Absolutely it did, Dave. And I tell you what, I could have almost expected that you would choose personalization for the letter P, because you are, so, you know, a lot of your work is about co-production and collaborative practice. And so I think that really shows as well the fact that you know, it's one of your go-to approaches, isn't it, and ways of looking at things. And I think what that illustrates in terms of this A to Z for people, Dave, is that, you know, different people have different approaches that are their thing, if you like, you know, and that's okay. And we're all going to have different approaches, different things that we like to use, and that's okay. And that's actually what's great and really fascinating about theory in social work, is there is no singular way that we have to do things, and we can all take from different approaches that we like to use. So it absolutely did make sense. Thank you, and thanks very much for that as well, Dave.
Thank you
for your P. Okay, so we're going to go now on to the letter Q. Now, what do you think the letter Q might stand for? Now, if we were playing Scrabble, we'd score a lot for the Q, wouldn't we? Because it's one of those words, one of those letters that you can't get into many words. So I think you score 10 in Scrabble for Q. What do you think we're going to go for in terms of the letter Q? It can link back to the A as well, I suppose. And I'm noticing one's flashing up in front of me now, so I'm hoping the team will deal with it, or if not, they'll tell me to do it later. But the letter Q, I put questions, because I think questions and theory just connect together, because the fear factor comes out of that question. And what theory are you using there? And people being terrified about, am I going to get the answer right? Am I going to get the answer right? But I think what Dave and I, you know, when I was just saying to Dave, well, that's your go-to theory, there is no right answer. The thing is, if I were to say to different team members, here's a scenario, what approach would you take? All of our team members would take a different approach. And actually, that's what can be very helpful in terms of social work, thinking about things from a relationship-based practice. We'd all maybe think about things differently. We'd all have the underlying values that are there. But the question is asked because the practice educator isn't a mind reader. They don't know. The question isn't designed, I've just seen there's a typo there on the slides, but the question isn't designed to catch you out. You know, they ask the question, as I said, because they're not mind readers. The other thing about questions is, if you don't understand something, then ask. You know, I get people asking me questions. People ask questions through the Social Work Theory app, and I try and answer them if I can. If they send me their essay question to answer for them, I don't do that. But, you know, if someone's got a question that they don't, I don't quite get this, can you help me with it? I'll do that. That the answer, you know, you send a question through the Theory app and the answer comes for you. The question that I started off with, from in terms of the A for attitude, that I saw on social media, I tried to answer it. So, you know, do ask questions about theory on social media. I've noticed how much people respond in some of those sort of appropriate social media settings. Clearly, be very confidential. Don't give, here's my scenario, and then what theories can I use? That would be entirely inappropriate. But to say, what does this theory mean, or how might this theory connect to this model? Ask the question on social media. There'll be a lot of support and help out there. So we're going to go on to the letter R. What do you think you might get in terms of the letter R? What we're going to go for here? I don't know what you've got in the chat. I'm just thinking, if you're posting words, it will be helpful to Diane Kultuma to pull all together. Here's everybody's A to Z. But for the letter R, I went for reimagining. And I went for reimagining because I think we need to reimagine social work theory in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some aspects of social work theory that have been around for so many years just don't work in our new ways of working. Particularly, I'm thinking theories and models around communication. So a lot of the theory of communication, models in terms of communication, are based around face-to-face interactions. So, for example, Egan's solar model that's often referred to in terms of communicating with people. The S stands for sitting squarely to the person. The O is about maintaining an open posture. The L is about leaning in slightly towards the person to really show that you're listening. The E is about maintaining eye contact with the person, and the R is about remaining relaxed, because that's supposed to in turn help the person relax. Now let's start joining the dots here. This model, if we think about decolonizing the curriculum, doesn't work for everybody. It's not, you know, it's not culturally diverse. It's not recognizing that some people actually, in terms of cultural humility, wouldn't want eye contact, wouldn't want you leaning in towards them, wouldn't want, you know, so it's not culturally diverse to start off with. So let's take a critical stance about it. But if we're just going to stick to thinking about the letter R, that needs to be reimagined in the online world. If we're not sat with one another, can we use the solar model? And I would ask you, and this is a bit of a plea from me as a trainer, to think about how you are communicating in the virtual world. The team know that wherever possible, I like them to keep their cameras on whilst we're doing our webinars, because I can take a look, and look, Dave's nodding away at me now, and so's Chris, and it helps me to feel like there's somebody there and there's somebody listening to what I'm saying. And they might look a bit bored, and then I think, okay, I'll move on, or they might look really interested and I think, okay, this is an important point to stick with and stay a bit longer. And it's really helpful for me to be able to see people. Now, sometimes I deliver training and there might be 60, 70 people, and every one of them's got their camera off. And I just feel like I'm sitting talking at a laptop. There feels to be a complete disconnect. So I would ask you to think about, how are you communicating with people online? And sometimes people put their cameras on. I'll be in a meeting, and generally people are used to having cameras on in meetings, so they'll have cameras on, but you can tell that they're typing, they're sending emails at the same time, they're dealing with something else, they're not really there, they're not really present. Think about, how do you communicate effectively in the virtual world? Maybe we need a new model. Maybe we need something that shows what we should do when we're communicating in the virtual world. But that's just an example. What I'm trying to say in terms of the art is, we sometimes need to think about new ways of working are going to impact on the models that we use. So reimagine them. An assignment, a reflective piece around a model that you think doesn't work now with new ways of working would be great as a student. You know, I think that would be fabulous. Okay, let's go to the letter S. Now, what do you think the letter S might stand for? Now, I have to say, I am expecting lots of things in the chat for the letter S. There are so many theories that begin with the letter S. And one of the things that I did in preparing for the A to Z, obviously the team chose their letters, and there were particular letters that I said, no, they have to be about this, and you'll see why later. But generally, it was just open in terms of what you could choose around the letters. But I went to the cards. You know, everybody's referred to the cards. I went to the cards. Well, I actually didn't go to the actual cards. I went to the booklet and I looked at the list of cards in the back. And I went for, when you think about the letter, which letter has the most theories? And it was the letter S. So S, it doesn't make any sense in some ways, but the letter S stands for 19, because there are 19 different theories, models, approaches, methods in social work on the cards that begin with the letter S. So, and there's probably more that aren't included on the cards. And in fact, I've written down underneath, the letter S could stand for not just 19, it could actually stand for 20, because there's also spoon theory, which doesn't appear on the cards actually, but is a theory that I've said to you I think is really relevant. So look at all of those theories that begin with the letter S. It must be social work starts with the letter S, so that's why we decided to go. All the theories begin with the letter S. I don't know, but there's a lot of theories begin with the letter S. Okay, we're going rapidly through. I'm sure lots of people are also trying to watch the football. I don't know if there's anything happened in the football, because I can't hear people. Obviously, you're all on mute, so I won't be able to hear the cheers if anything's happened. But here we go for the letter T. What do you think the letter T might relate to in terms of our A to Z of theory? The T that I went for, it's a double T. It's an alliterative T that I went for. I went for the theory tree. The theory tree is one of my favourite activities to think about in terms of how we use theory in our practice. Similar to the head, heart, hands, the H, it helps you to think about approaches, theories, models and methods in practice. Now, we did look at this when we did the theory picnic webinar, which I think was webinar 17. But we looked at helping people to identify what approaches do you like to use in your practice? What theories do you generally draw on? What models do you use, or what models does the organisation you work in want you to use? And what methods might you draw out of those? And once you've done that, once you've developed your ideas around that, you've got your own roots, and you'll see growth in terms of theory-informed practice. You will see that practice grow. And then the rabbit, it's not going to be there anymore, because you've got a clear understanding of the theory that you're using in practice. So that's what I went for with the letter T. We're wandering through now, getting towards the end of the alphabet. What do you think about the letter U? What might we have in terms of the letter U? Now, there is a cheat here. The theory cards are done to help you to really quickly identify things very quickly. If you've got the booklet, now I've told you what I did with the letter S, you're in the booklet now, aren't you? Going through alphabetical, because they're all in alphabetical order at the end of the booklet when it tells you what there is. And you'll all be having a look, what is there? What begins with the letter U? But the U that I've gone for is underlying principles. There are some principles that come up again and again in different theories. And that can add to people's confusion around it, because people say, but I thought that was part of it. I thought that was personalisation, not person-centred practice. Well, actually, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of similarities, as Dave's just demonstrated to us. So I think what can be really helpful is for you to think through where some of those underlying principles come from. So, you know, the little illustration here that Rosie's drawn up for us just shows that there's an underlying principle we use in social work all of the time, that a service user should be seen as an expert on their own situation. Now, you could say that's drawn out of a task-centred approach, because that's in there. You could say it's drawn out of a narrative approach. It's drawn out of the exchange model of assessment. It's in strengths-based perspectives. It's in the personal recovery model. It's in social constructionism, especially where we think about self-narratives. All of those things, all of those theories, models, approaches, all say that the individual should be seen as the expert in their own situation, as does personalisation, as does co-production, as does many other things. So underlying principles sit beneath all of the theory base that we use. In terms of the letter V, what have I gone for around V, do you think? And the letter V, I have gone for, and I've talked about this a few times. If we had more time, I'd talk about it now, but we'll probably go into depth on more of these areas if people are interested in our next season of webinars. But I have gone with the letter V for verbal or visual, whether you're a verbal thinker or a visual thinker. Most teaching on social work theory is done verbally, and very often with a lot of complex, unnecessary language, as Nicola said earlier. I think if we can start to use verbal and visual ways of thinking about theory, it will help us to connect the theory in our practice. So using objects is a good way of thinking about theory in a visual way. It can help you to relate a theory to an object. If you're a visual thinker, it's a great way of doing that. It's a great way of remembering it. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean, it was mentioned when we had the letter M with Chris earlier. Think about it. Everyone remembers Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when I say it, everybody in their mind has got a picture of the triangle and the lines, you know, the little, but everyone has an image of that pyramid of needs. And when a theory is expressed through a visual image, very often people find it more straightforward, easier to get a hold of. So what I'd suggest to you is, if you know that you are a visual thinker, try to attach visual images to a theory that you find complex, that's very verbally written about, that's complex, and it'll help you to understand theory more clearly. So think about translating it, if you like. So translate the language into imagery, and then that can help you to think about theory. So then we're going to go on to the letter W. So this letter is Kulchuma's letter. So Kulchuma, if you want to pop your mic on and tell us what you went for in terms of the letter W, that would be really helpful.
Yep, so the W that I went for, it could be quite cliche, but I went for webinar, which is what you're all on now. And the reason I chose webinar is because as a new student, I really struggled getting to grasp with what an approach is, what a theory is, what a model is, what a method is, and how they all interlink and things like that. And by accessing the Social Work Student Connect webinars when they first launched, it really helped me to understand them and then to put them in practice as well during my placement this year. And a lot of the things that the other team members have spoken about, like the previous webinars, the theory cards, they've all really helped sort of link it all as well. So everything is really well linked. And by understanding all of this, I feel like I've got a better grasp on how social work needs to be in practice, because if you don't know the different approaches that there are and how you can implement them, you're not going to be able to give the individuals that you're supporting the best support that's best for them by taking into account the different theories that apply to it. So like the systems theory, so by looking at all their sort of surroundings and the different things that are impacting on them, once you take all of that into account, you can then think about, right, okay, well, this approach is going to help you support them better. So I think webinars for me has been a brilliant thing for me to come out of this pandemic.
I think that's really interesting there, where you ended that, Kulchuma, by saying to come out of this pandemic, because if you think about 18 months ago, webinars was a word we'd never even heard of, really. I don't think I'd heard of webinars at all until the lockdown. So it's interesting, isn't it, that it's a when you think about reimagining things, this is a way of reimagining how we learn about social work theory, isn't it? So, and I know you became a team member for season 2, but you've attended from session 1, haven't you, right from the beginning? So absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Kulchuma. That was fabulous, your letter W. And we're going on to the letter X. Now this one is tricky. It is tricky, isn't it, too? Again, it's one I think you score a lot for on Scrabble, but finding a word that begins with the letter X is really tricky. So I've got to be honest and say that I did cheat. because I thought about X-ray and I thought about xylophone, and they just didn't really relate into social work theory. So I've got to be honest, and I did cheat a little bit, and I went for that treasure map that we used in session 26, and X marks the spot. So the word praxis with an X in it, it comes from the ancient Greek apparently, but it's a word that you see, you know, the language we talked about earlier with Nicola, and you see all these books with big language in. Praxis is one of those words that often you think, what's this all about? But essentially the word praxis with an X in it, it's a process by which we use a theory, a lesson, or a skill in our practice. It's really about bringing what you've learned at university into your placement on practice. It's praxis. It's really demonstrating the use of your theory and your thinking in your practice. And it can, you know, dictionary definitions tell us that it can also refer to the act of engaging, applying, exercising, realizing, or practicing ideas. So it's about ideas and then making those come to life and using them. And really that's what theory is. So when you're using theory in your practice, you are demonstrating praxis with an X. X marks the spot. It's the treasure. When we bring theory into our practice, that's where the treasure absolutely happens. So there's your letter X. Okay, so we've got X. We're going to go on to the letter Y, and for the letter Y, I think it's the final one that's going to be by a team member. So I'm looking for Becky to put her microphone on and to tell us what you went for in terms of the letter Y, Becky.
I went for YouTube. So we record all these webinars, obviously, and they all go back on YouTube. And I think that although we get a lot from the webinars as a team, for me, sometimes I miss a lot because we'll be worrying about something or be doing something in the background or be on Twitter. So it's really good for me that I can watch them back and pick out other things. And I think, Siobhan, you always make sense. So you just speak in a language that we just kind of get it. I think we've all said that. People always say that you just say things, but you say it in a different way to maybe our tutors or how we might explain it ourselves. And we just kind of get it. So I like watching them back because you make sense to me. But there's two others that I particularly follow, and we've had both of them as guests on the webinar, which has been really, really great. So the first one is Shabnam Ahmed and her School of Shabs, and I don't know whether I should admit, but like I've actually listened to her. I've actually listened to a few of her YouTube videos in the shower because I find that she's really relaxing. She's got this voice and it just like really chills me out. And she talks about, she's quite spiritual, I suppose, when she's talking about her experience as a practice educator. But as a student, I found that really interesting to hear about, you know, her tips. And she talks a lot about well-being and comes at it from that point of view about, you know, talking about stress and your well-being and exploring your emotions. And I found that, you know, as a student, really quite relaxing. So I found that she's, yeah, quite soothing. So you make sense. Shabnam soothes. And then the last one for me is Kaylee, and she's Kaylee Rose Evans, and she's been a guest as well in one of our early webinars. And for me as well, I think she, to me, is quite relatable at the moment. I think she's fairly new into her, you know, practice, a couple of years into, and she's doing, she's studying again now. And so I find her quite relatable because I think of Siobhan and Shabnam as like peers. You know, you've been experienced, you've done this for a long time, you're practice educators, you've got so much to offer us in, you know, from that point of view. So I look up to you. And Kaylee, I kind of think, oh, I get that. You know, she's talking about something about how she failed her first social work interview. That's completely relatable. Well, touch wood, I didn't fail my interview, but like, you know, like relatable. And she talks about how she's managing like her current caseloads, if they're large, if they're complex, and she's done additional things, you know, about how to prepare for interviews and stuff. So it's just a slightly different route that Shabnam and Siobhan have done, but they're all available on YouTube, and I think they're really helpful to have. And I think maybe they've expanded more because of the pandemic. I don't know whether they would have been around, you know, if we hadn't have had that. I don't know, but it's just nice that you can dip into them. They're around, and some I actually don't watch, I listen to a bit more, but then some I really watch and I pay attention to. So yeah, I just think they can really help. So that was why.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you for that, Becky. I tell you what I think is really interesting is, you know, Cultuma's W 18 months ago, we'd never heard of really webinars. And your why, I think, had I looked on YouTube 2 years ago, there would have been just so little about social work on there. And now there is lots. And as you say, lots of relatable content and lots of content that you can think, you know, I think our webinars, people can go back to and think, oh, I'll go and watch the reflective writing one because I've got something to write about now, or I can listen to it whilst I'm writing the assignment, you know, that kind of thing. I think there's things that you can go back to. So it's almost like now there's a whole host of resources on there that you can go and look for when the time is right for you. So I agree with your choice of why for YouTube. Thank you very much for that, Becky. And then we're going to go to our final letter. We're going to go to the Z. We've done an A to Z. We've done a whole way through the whole alphabet. So the letter Z. And what you're going to go for, I don't know what you're going to go for. There is some overlap. I don't know if you've noticed, if you were at session 26, there's 1 or 2 letters that we've kept as an overlap from the A to Z of reflective practice. And I did wonder, should we change the Z? But I've stuck with the Z that we also used for reflective practice. And the reason I've done that is because I wanted to do a whole circle, if you like. I wanted to go from the A through to the Z, and the Z is zeal. You need to have zeal. It takes us right back to the A in attitude. If your attitude is, well, I can't be bothered, I'm not interested, you're not going to get very far in terms of theory-informed practice. You need to have some zeal. You need to think, okay, I don't understand that bit, or I'm not interested in that bit. So what bit can I go for? What can I look at? Theory is exciting. Theory brings such a lot in terms of our practice. Theory can be great fun to learn about. You need to be zealous in your learning about theory. You need to be willing, energized, and motivated, because that's exactly the attitude that your practice educator is looking for. So the A to the Z took us on a full circle, but there's another full circle for us as a team, and the connections that we hope that we've created. We're coming full circle from the webinar that we started with, and we just thought we might do one for a few weeks. We never anticipated that over a year later we would have done 52 webinars, and that over the summer and into the autumn we'd be speaking at international conferences to talk about the work that we've done. We never anticipated that that would be happening. But we started off with the theory fear factor. We've come through 52 webinars along the way through to an A to Z of theory. So this is where we started. We started our webinar number 1 was the theory fear factor. Through that full circle, what I wanted to do today was help those of you who are students to think about how do you overcome that theory fear factor, to think about those of you who are practice educators, to think about how do I help students overcome that theory fear factor. So what sits behind that image builds on the building blocks that we use today and spells out the word theory. And that word theory, for me, these are the key activities that can help you to overcome that terrified rabbit in the headlights look. So the letter T was all about the theory tree. The H was about the head, heart, and hands. The E was about the envelope. O was objects. R was reimagining. And Y is YouTube. If you use those activities throughout your training, you will no longer look like a terrified rabbit in the headlight. Instead, you will be a student who gets comments, as I know that the team have, and the team have talked about this, and I think even Kelly posted something about this on social media I saw recently. But we'll come through to the point where, you know, our team members are being told on placement, you are really getting hold of theory here. You are really good in terms of theory-informed practice. And it's because through the webinars, the team have needed to do these activities, because I test them out on the team and I say, look, have a go at this. And, you know, Dave and Kultuma and Becky have to come along and present their head, heart and hands to you as a team. Everybody is engaging in these activities. And these activities spell out the word theory, but these activities will help you to overcome that terrified rabbit in the headlights look. And so our final slide of the evening is our full A to Z. So let's just run through it very quickly. A is for attitude. B is for barriers. C is for cards. D was for decolonising the curriculum. E, envelope. F, fear. G, Di brought us her growth. H was head, heart, hands. I and Gozy brought us intersectionality. J was join the dots. K, Kelly brought us Cartman's drama triangle. L, Nicola talked to us about language. M, Chris talked to us about motivational interviewing. The N was name that tune. The O was objects. P, Dave talked to us about personalization. The Q was all about questions. R is all about reimagining. The S was about 19 or possibly 20. The T was about the theory tree. The U was underlying principles. The V, verbal or visual. In the W, Kulchuma told us about her learning from the webinars. X marks the spot. And in Y, Becky told us about the use of YouTube. And Z is all about the zeal. You need to go with zeal into theory-informed practice. So thank you very much for joining us today. I am really pleased that we didn't lose loads of numbers to the football either. It didn't look, not too many people have gone. I don't know how the football's going. I'm not really a football fan, but if you are, I hope it goes the way that you want it to go. And generally, this is where we now take a break for the summer. We're going to be back on Wednesday, the 15th of September. We have got a fabulous season of webinars coming up. We're going to do some more in-depth webinars about particular concepts, and we're going to bring some concepts along that I don't think are being talked about at all in social work, but are really, really important for us to think about. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I think the team will perhaps just want to wave goodbye to you, and we look forward to seeing you all again in September. So thanks ever so much, everybody. Bye.